Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. With the consumer carbon tax on its way out, what that will mean for your wallet.
The tax has become divisive.
Plus, keeping up with the election campaign trail, where the leaders are at and their latest promises. And Amtrak trains off the tracks between Vancouver and the U.S.
It's really frustrating because we specifically booked the train, you know, because you got the beautiful views.
Amtrak wants to apologize for the inconvenience.
Why the service says it will have reduced capacity.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Baneet Braich. We begin with the fate of BC's consumer carbon tax. The NDP government says the divisive tax is on its way out. As Katie DeRosa reports, MLAs are holding a marathon debate session to fast-track ending the tax.
BC's carbon tax is in its final hours. Finance Minister Brenda Bailey introduced legislation Monday morning to scrap the consumer carbon tax
and set the carbon tax rate to $0 per ton of emissions as of April 1st.
BC was the first in North America to put a price on carbon pollution in 2008 under former Premier Gordon Campbell. But leaders say it's become a political liability as British Columbians look for savings during an affordability crisis. The NDP government, which has a one-seat majority, took measures to make sure the bill could be introduced, debated, and passed in one day, so it can take effect by midnight. Since it relates to the provincial budget, the bill amounts to a confidence vote. If the bill fails, the government falls. EB says it won't come to that.
We have a majority in the House. The bill will pass.
Forcing a law through in one day is a rare move, and one that didn't sit well with opposition parties.
The total disregard by this Premier and this government to take any substantive action on carbon tax until the very literally 11th hour of the conversation nationally.
The two Green MLAs said they would be voting no to scrapping the carbon tax.
The Green Caucus will be opposing this bill throughout the day.
Dropping the carbon tax to zero is expected to save drivers about 17 cents per litre on fuel. As for whether those savings will actually be passed on to consumers, EB says oil and gas companies are required to explain their prices to the BC Utilities Commission to prevent price gouging.
Just a little heads up to the oil and gas companies, now is not the moment. British Columbians need to see that tax reduction show up at the pump when they fill up.
EB has not provided details on how the government will make up the nearly $2 billion hole in provincial coffers. Without the carbon tax, lower-income families will no longer get the Climate Action Tax Credit. The move in BC follows Mark Carney's first move as Prime Minister, which was to bring the tax to zero on April 1st. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
And amid U.S. President Donald Trump's ongoing tariffs and threats on Canadian goods, there's concern from Canada's book industry. Michelle Gomez spoke with some bookstores who fear the worst.
The federal government is currently deciding what goods to place counter tariffs on. It's part of $125 billion worth of counter tariff measures, and American books are on the list.
It's an extinction level event for the Canadian publishing and bookselling industry.
I'm here at Pulp Fiction Books in Vancouver. Owner Chris Brayshaw says most of the books sold in Canada are printed in the U.S. Even books that are written by Canadian authors or published by Canadian publishers often use American printers and would be subject to a tariff.
The tariffs apply not to the creator's country of origin or to the publisher's country of origin, but to where the books are actually physically manufactured. Very few books that are sold in Canada are actually printed in Canada, even if they are published by Canadian publishers.
Brayshaw says at least 85% of their books are printed in the States, and this is the case for many other Canadian bookstores. And he says the cost of this will likely get passed on to the consumer.
It hits every single level of the industry, and it is going to affect every single member of the industry catastrophically.
The government is seeking views from Canadians on what items should or shouldn't be considered. Anyone can write to the government about it until Wednesday. Michelle Gomez, CBC News, Vancouver.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh made a campaign stop in Victoria today, where he promised to retrofit millions of family homes in Canada and pay for it by cutting subsidies for oil and gas companies. CBC's Janice McGregor has more.
Jagmeet Singh announced a climate platform today that would eliminate what he says are some $1.8 billion a year in federal tax breaks and subsidies for the oil and gas industry. New Democrats would redirect that money towards new programs to fund energy efficiency upgrades, with the bulk of it targeted at low-income households that want to, for example, improve the insulation in their home or perhaps install heat pumps. Even though there's now a consensus across the three main national campaigns about the need to eliminate the consumer carbon tax, Singh tried to explain to reporters today how the NDP's platform would do more to protect the environment.
We were going to remove the carbon tax off of consumers, but there are some massive differences between us and the other parties. The fact that we want to eliminate entirely the fossil fuel subsidies, and Mark Carney wants to continue to give your hard-earned money to these highly profitable companies is wrong, and that's a big difference between us and them. The fact that Pierre Poilievre wants to let big polluters pollute as much as they want is a big difference between us and them. We want big polluters to pay their fair share.
The decision to announce this today in Victoria may be strategic because at the British Columbia legislature behind me, there's an emergency debate on today. Tomorrow, April 1st, is the day that the federal carbon tax will be eliminated, but it's also the day that BC's provincial carbon tax is scheduled to increase if the provincial legislature doesn't pass a bill to kill it off as well, too. The Green Party, both federally and provincially, is now a fairly lonely voice advocating for the value of consumer carbon pricing. In the seats on Vancouver Island in particular, however, if the Greens gain support on that basis at the expense of New Democrats, that could hurt the NDP that already find themselves in tough races against Conservatives and now possibly resurgent Liberal support as well. While in Victoria, the federal NDP leader made time for a stop-in with BC's NDP premier. Jagmeet Singh may need the support and perhaps the ground game of David Eby's team if he's going to hold on to, let alone grow, the dozen or so seats he won in this province last time. Janice McGregor, CBC News, Victoria.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is promising to create a national energy corridor. He says it would expedite approvals for major infrastructure projects to help ship resources across the Atlantic to Europe. Evan Dyer has more.
Pierre Poilievre chose St. John, New Brunswick, which the Canadian Chamber of Commerce has described as Canada's most tariff-exposed city, to pitch a proposal that he says would make Canada more resilient in the face of Donald Trump's trade war, and that's a national energy corridor where there would be pre-approval for pipelines carrying Canadian oil and gas to new markets, an attempt, of course, to divert some of Canada's energy away from its current almost monopolistic buyer, the United States, which buys 4 million barrels of oil from Canada every day, to markets in Europe and in Asia. Here in New Brunswick, the market would be primarily in Europe.
With Donald Trump threatening our country with tariffs, we need big projects that link our regions east to west. We need to be able to get our resources across Canada, bypassing America, so we can trade more with each other and sell our resources to the world.
He says that what he would do would be to seek pre-approval from those along the pathway of this pipeline, whether they be provinces or First Nations, and then be able to give a guarantee to energy companies that once granted, approval would never be taken away, that they would be safe making large investments. Projects, of course, to bring energy to the east, Energy East itself, other proposals such as the idea of putting an LNG terminal in Saguenay, Quebec to bring Canadian natural gas to Tidewater. Those kinds of projects have run into problems in the past, both economic and political, and one of the main obstacles to those kinds of projects have been the objections of provinces such as the government of Quebec. We have seen some change in public opinion around that, and we've also seen signals from the government of Quebec that it is open to re-examining those kinds of proposals in the light of what's happening in the trade war. But still, it must be said, details missing from this proposal about exactly how Pierre Poilievre would secure those agreements, those sort of blank check approvals from First Nations and others along that pipeline's route. Evan Dyer, CBC News in St. John, New Brunswick.
Mark Carney is pledging to speed up the pace of building homes in Canada, but the Liberal leader is also facing questions about one of his party's candidates. CBC's Olivia Stanovich has more.
Liberal leader Mark Carney says Canadians are facing the biggest crisis in their lifetimes, and he wants the country to build its way out of it. Carney unveiled the Liberal signature housing policy today, a plan to double the pace of home building in Canada with a goal of building up to 500,000 new houses per year. Now, Carney's pitch is that the federal government would create a new standalone entity that would offer tens of billions of dollars worth of loans and grants to home builders. And while Carney tried to stick to the details of today's announcement, his news conference was overshadowed by questions about Liberal candidate Paul Chang, who's under fire for comments he made back in January that recently surfaced, in which Chang told a Chinese language news conference that people should bring a conservative candidate named Zhou Tai to the Chinese consulate and collect a bounty that's out for Tai.
This is a person of integrity who's served this community, his community, as a senior police officer for, as I said, more than a quarter century. He's made a terrible lapse in judgment. He's made an apology for that. It's also an individual who has family in Hong Kong. He's under no illusions about the situation there, the situation in broader China. He's made those apologies. He's made them directly to the individual concerned. He's made them directly to me. He has my confidence.
Tai says no apology is sufficient. He was targeted by Beijing for speaking out about civil rights violations in Hong Kong. Now, Carney calls these comments by Chang deeply offensive, but he stands by Chang, saying he spoke to him over the weekend and that Chang can continue to run for the Liberals in the riding of Markham-Unionville, despite calls from Tai and the Liberals' political opponents, as well as dozens of Hong Kong organizations to give Chang the boot. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Georgetown, Ontario.
Darius Madavi joins us now with a first look at the weather. Darius, how is it looking out there?
Oh, pretty good, all things considered. I mean, we've got lots of blue skies across much of the south coast, although a few showers still present, especially on the South Island and up on the North Shore here in Vancouver. If we take a look at the forecast, you'll notice that at times we will see some showers moving through the lower mainland, especially in the overnight hours, maybe lingering into the early morning tomorrow and Wednesday. But again, most of that happening overnight, so most people won't see much of it. As we get into the end of Wednesday and into Thursday, nothing but sunshine, and that's the same holding right through into the weekend as temperatures continue to climb as well. And again, tomorrow, also some sunshine, just a little bit cloudy in the morning.
All right, thank you so much, Darius. We'll check back in with you in a bit.
Thank you.
And BC Ferries are getting 4 new hybrid ships starting in 2029, but says it's disappointed it didn't get approval for all the 5 vessels that it asked for. The vessels will service major routes between Vancouver Island and the Lower Mainland, replacing Queen of New Westminster, which is 61 years old, and the 49-year-old Queens of Alberni, Coquitlam, and Cowichan. Now, BC Ferries had submitted a capital plan to build 5 new vessels, but the Independent Ferry Commissioner ruled the 5th was unnecessary. And if you have travel plans for the Fraser Highway, brace for some delays. Starting tomorrow, part of the stretch will be closed for 6 months as crews begin constructing the new Green Timber SkyTrain station. Take a look. So drivers are warned that this stretch of the highway between 140th Street and 96th Avenue will be closed from April 1st until the end of October as crews perform construction there. Now, intermittent overnight closures will also be in effect between 96th Avenue and 148th Street. The Ministry of Transportation says 96th Avenue is the primary alternate route. It promises beautiful views of the Pacific Northwest, but riders on a popular Amtrak route were forced to take the bus instead today after the rail operator was worried for their safety. That story next.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and this is your CBC Inbox.
Celebrate cinema and social impact with CBC at the Sundar Prize Film Festival, April 10th to the 13th. The festival features a diverse slate of films, panels, and special events that shine a light on stories of empowerment and transformation. For tickets, visit sundarprize.com. And never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter at cbc.ca/Vancouver Inbox.
BC's police watchdog says Crown Council should consider charges against the VPD officer who struck a pedestrian on East Hastings Street in 2024. The Independent Investigations Office says the officer was traveling eastbound in the morning of May 21st when they struck the man near the intersection of Hastings and Dunlevy. He was taken to hospital and deemed to have serious injuries. The police watchdog believes that the officer may have committed driving offenses in relation to their use of the vehicle. Now, the BC Prosecution Service will now decide whether to pursue charges. And BC's Health Minister, Josie Osborne, says the province will review spending in all of provincial health authorities and that the reviews will begin with the Provincial Health Services Authority.
We've selected the PHSA as the first health authority to undergo review due to its role in providing healthcare services through BC Cancer, BC Children's Hospital, BC Women's Hospital and Health Centre, BC Mental Health, and the BC Centre for Disease Control.
She says she wants to ensure resources go to critical patient services and to minimize wasteful administrative costs. The reviews come amid a series of ER closures that have spread from rural communities to parts of the Lower Mainland. Amtrak is replacing most of its rail cars with buses along its Cascades route. The fleet was pulled after inspectors found corrosion on decades-old carts. The company says restoration is in the works, but as John Hernandez reports, train passengers weren't thrilled to find out that their trip went off the rails.
Monday morning at Pacific Central Station, and there's no shortage of disappointment.
Now we're sitting here eating a bagel, waiting, just wasting our time waiting for a bus.
Seattle-bound Teresa Dietrich and Harry Harrison are among passengers finding out their train rides were cancelled and replaced by a bus.
Well, we've done it up from Seattle to here, so we wanted to do it the other way, and we're also going to Portland afterwards and then back to Vancouver, all on the trains which now are not going to be running.
Yeah, it's really frustrating because we specifically booked the train, because you got the beautiful views.
Amtrak pulled 70 of its carts off the tracks after inspectors found corrosion. The aging Horizon fleet is 35 years old.
The corrosion was to a level that we worried about the structural integrity during a crash.
More than 24 rail cars were pulled off of the Cascades route that runs along the west coast between BC and Oregon, connecting Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland.
Amtrak wants to apologize for the inconvenience. Obviously, this is a less than ideal situation, but it's not a move we would have made if we didn't feel that it was important for the safety of our passengers.
Amtrak is scrambling to get the service back online, sourcing trains from other parts of North America. It expects it will have train service between Vancouver and Seattle on Tuesday.
The trains will be shorter than usual. We don't have a lot of available equipment, but we are doing our best.
Amtrak says its schedule isn't affected and refunds are available. Long-term, the rail company has plans to replace the aging fleet with faster IRO trains, expected to be introduced into this route over the next 2 years. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
And Surrey's mayor says the city is looking to implement a 2.8% property tax increase this year. She's citing concerns about U.S. tariffs and affordability. Brenda Locke says council has negotiated $250 million from the province to help cover the costs of the Surrey Police Service, helping the city alleviate its tax burden. The increase was announced as part of Surrey's general operating and capital budgets for 2025 until 2029. It will help hire dozens of new fire and police positions and 10 new bylaw positions.
Conversely, this current council is all about prioritizing smart investments in our community rather than cutting back on essential services.
Locke says the 2.8% general property tax increase is among the lowest in the entire region. Taxpayers also face another 1% increase on top of that in the form of a road levy. The last day of March in Tofino, plenty of fun on the beach with surfers and beachgoers soaking up the sun. And there's more bright skies to come. Darius has your full forecast coming up. With an ongoing trade war, some might be questioning if this is really the right time to invest or buy a home in Canada. Well, Andrew Chang explains why it's so unusual to see prices, sales, and interest rates all falling together, and if now is really a golden opportunity for some.
We asked realtors to describe the past 3 years in Canada's housing market. Terrible, paralyzed, and twilight zone were a few things that came to mind. Take a look at this graph. Monthly home sales in Canada each year. This line is the average at any given time based on the previous 10 years. And this is the past few years where you can see sales fell well below that 10-year average. That was the terrible. But look here at this little spike. That's the end of 2024 when things started to look like they were about to rebound in a big way. Interest rates were finally down to what the Bank of Canada considered neutral, a nice steady place. Buyers were jumping back into the market, and pretty much everyone was predicting this was just the beginning. Both prices and sales would jump in 2025.
What we were seeing around the fourth quarter of 2024 was a really strong recovery.
In Toronto, we were seeing 40% year-over-year increases in sales volume. In Vancouver, 30%.
But then, just a month later, the twilight zone, because all of that fell off a cliff.
We had that momentum more or less continue to January, and then February completely fell off.
Things all started to kind of unravel again a little bit.
Let's try to understand what happened. According to the Canadian Real Estate Association, home sales took a nosedive right across the country last month, falling about 10% from January to February. That's the biggest monthly drop we've seen in almost 3 years. But if you zoom in on Canada's most expensive markets, the drop was even bigger, almost 13% in Vancouver and close to a 30% drop in Toronto. And here's another way to look at it. Sales were also down in a big way when you compare this February to last February. And that's a big deal because interest rates in February 2024, so a year ago, were still at their peak. What were mortgage rates back then? Like 7%. It was a tough time to buy because you knew your mortgage would be expensive. Now, you're looking at maybe mortgage rates a bit over half that, which isn't too bad. And yet, far fewer people are buying.
For the month of February, 2025 is the lowest number of detached home sales on record, going back to 1997.
And it's not like buyers are just waiting for more options. In Toronto, for example, listings are close to double what they were this time last year. So what's going on?
The tariffs, we're going to tariff the hell out of them.
I am a tariff man.
It's really hard to point to anything except all of the uncertainty caused by tariff and all the threats about tariffs.
And the head of the Canadian Real Estate Association came to the same conclusion, writing, "The uncertainty of the last few weeks seems to be causing some buyers to think twice about big financial decisions right now." And it's not hard to imagine why that might be true when headlines like these are becoming more and more common. A Canadian company bleeding out jobs. Because let's say you work at a company like that, where the workforce was almost cut in half. But for years, you've been dreaming of a bigger home. You had a plan to sell your place, buy a new one, and take on a bigger mortgage because it's a really nice place. But you just watched hundreds of your colleagues lose their jobs. How do you feel about your job security right now? Is this the best time to take on more financial debt?
If you're not sure about your job, the mortgage is not something that you can decide that at some later point, I don't want to do this anymore. You don't get to go to the bank and say, I was reconsidering my options. Can I just not pay for the next little while? With rental options, you can get out of your lease. You can move to a different place. You can upsize, downsize based on your economic environment. But buying and selling a home is much more difficult.
According to the Conference Board of Canada, all of this tension brought by tariffs pushed consumer confidence down 12 points in February, which is the largest one-month drop since 2023, and only a few points higher than it was in April 2020 when the whole country shut down due to COVID.
That same uneasiness that we felt in the pandemic has creeped back in.
So all of this uncertainty has meant many more people who were on the line, teetering between buying and waiting. They've opted to play it safe. But here's the flip side of that. For those who are willing and able to dive into the housing market, now might be a pretty good time.
It is, a bit of a Goldilocks moment.
So it's hard to know exactly how big this group is of prospective home buyers waiting with question marks over their heads over on the sidelines. But according to everyone we spoke to, there is no doubt that there is pent-up demand.
Certainly, it's a substantial cohort of people who want to get in and are just waiting.
And if you're one of those people, you may have some leverage because, say, the person you're buying from needs to sell in the next 30 days for whatever reason. Since sales are down, they're likely getting fewer offers, and that means less of a bidding war for you.
You can negotiate with willing sellers, right? Sellers who have had their listings on the market for 90 days plus, right? They're usually in a scenario where they might be willing to entertain kind of lower offers, right? Lowball offers.
We're finding out what the clients are working with. They're negotiating, they're getting lower prices, they're in the driver's seat. So they definitely have a lot more power and leverage than they ever had in the past.
And what generally happens when buyers have leverage? Prices tend to come down. And we're starting to see that materialize too, with a 3.3% drop in the national average sale price year over year across Canada.
It's one of these rare moments where you have a buyer's market, which is not very common, especially in Canada's biggest cities like Toronto and Vancouver. I can't remember the last time this happened in the Toronto market.
And what makes this maybe a little more unusual is the fact that this is all happening at a time when the Bank of Canada is aggressively cutting interest rates.
I mean, super unusual. I've been in real estate now for over 13 years. I haven't experienced this before.
These type of rate cuts, 7 consecutive ones, doesn't happen very often.
It's really the fear factor that's keeping people out of the market now. It's not interest rates. It's not the availability of homes. It is just fear.
So this all reads like great news if you're a buyer ready to make a move. But just know this, the window of opportunity might, maybe, be pretty small. And I'll give you a few reasons why. Last spring, a BMO survey showed that 72% of aspiring homeowners in Canada, meaning people who don't own a home but want to, they were waiting for interest rates to drop. And another survey tried to figure out how far they'd need to drop for people to jump in. And it found the vast majority of people were waiting for the overnight rate to hit 2.75%. That just happened.
As of right now, I'd say, yeah, I mean, there's certainly that kind of Goldilocks zone where there is a decent amount of inventory, lower rates. But if all buyers decide to re-enter the market over the next few months and there is a flurry of buying activity, we could then see this other weird zone where, like, even with all of the uncertainty and all the nonsense going on in the market, pricing start to push upwards again.
And we saw something similar happen a few years ago in early 2020. Home sales, home prices, and interest rates all dropped. And yeah, the going was good for a while. A golden opportunity for those who were able to push past the pandemic hardship and uncertainty. You could buy a home at a lower price and at an ultra low rate.
If you look at the third and fourth quarters of 2020, there were still people who were very, very nervous about leaving the safety of their homes to even go look for something, and others that boldly charged into the market before prices went up and feel like they won the lottery.
Right, because if you waited too long, somewhere between half a year and a year later, all of that pent-up demand and all those people looking to take advantage of low rates, they jumped in and prices skyrocketed.
Initially, the pandemic caused home sales to slump, but insiders say 2021 numbers are already surpassing expectations, and millennials are among those driving up sales.
I think people just became more confident, and that is when the wave of people kind of started rushing back into the market.
Which brings us back to the biggest question in all of this. What would it take for that confidence to return this time?
There has to be, again, a catalyst that kind of tells buyers that, okay, now we know what the new normal is. Either there will be tariffs or there won't be tariffs. So once that happens, then we can all adjust to whatever that new normal is. And then I feel at that point, then we will see kind of like that rebalancing of the market.
Now, predictions are a dangerous game. If Trump did, in fact, cause this turmoil in the housing market with this constant threat of tariffs, he could just as easily do something else tomorrow or the day after to once again completely rearrange the equation. So change can come fast, and it's worth paying attention.
Measles cases in BC continue to be low, with just 5 confirmed cases so far, all travel-related. But elsewhere, those numbers are exploding. Public health agencies say Ontario has confirmed nearly 600 cases since October. The state of Texas is reporting 400 cases and 2 deaths, a number that saw an increase of 20% in the last 3 days. And experts warn of further spread due to low vaccination rates. Now, we know that school-age kids are the hardest hit by measles. The virus can leave a lasting damage to lungs, the immune system, even brain damage. And CBC's medical columnist, Dr. Melissa Lem, tells us that she's been going through questions and concerns from parents, and she, of course, joins us now. Dr. Lem, what have you heard from parents right now?
Well, I started having these conversations about measles and vaccination more often about 2 months ago when we first started hearing about that outbreak in Texas. And it really intensified around when the 6-year-old girl who was unvaccinated died of the measles. And these conversations range from questions about, should I get my child vaccinated early before 12 months because we have upcoming plane travel? Or are my child's vaccines up to date? Or is this fever and this rash measles? And it makes sense that parents are talking about this because the majority would do anything and everything they can to keep their children safe. And vaccination against measles is an important part of that.
Now, what is the youngest that kids can get the MMR vaccine?
Babies as young as 6 months old qualify for the MMR vaccine, but we recommend that to people who are traveling outside of Canada to countries where there are active measles cases. And the reason for this is when you're younger, your immune system typically isn't as mature and you don't mount to the same long-lasting immune response as older children. And also up to 12 months old, you still have some of those protective circulating antibodies from your mom's pregnancy in your system. So if you do get vaccinated early, we do recommend that you get 2 more vaccines after that. So the typical one at 12 months and then another one when you reach school age between 4 to 6 years old.
So basically like a booster for that then?
That's right.
Okay. Why do you think that vaccination rates have been dropping over the years? Are there certain reasons that come to mind? Have parents told you about certain concerns?
I think this is multifactorial, and one of the main reasons is lack of access to family doctors. There are hundreds of thousands of patients across BC right now who don't have family doctors to keep them up to date with vaccines. Also, there was an issue during the COVID-19 pandemic where there were fewer public health clinics and school vaccination clinics. And also, unfortunately, there's a big problem with misinformation and disinformation around vaccine safety. And so I think parents really are starting to wake up, though, as we see more and more cases and resurgences of these diseases that were once eradicated, to the severe harms. And they want to keep their kids safe. And I think the bottom line is that vaccines are safe and effective, and they do save lives.
And just one more time, do you think that we'll see kind of this trend reverse?
I think we will, because as parents, I mentioned, we will do anything and everything we can to protect our kids' health. And so as we see those cases of hospitalizations, I do want to point out that within Canada, 1 in 10 people who get measles are hospitalized. In the US, it's 1 in 5. As we see these serious cases, parents will start to take notice and make sure that their kids are up to date with their vaccines.
And Dr. Lem, we have about 30 seconds, but just wondering if you can kind of tell the public how contagious measles can be. Why is it significant to look into this?
It's incredibly contagious. It's more contagious than COVID, more contagious than Ebola. If you walk into a room and you have measles, 9 out of 10 people who are unvaccinated will leave that room with measles. So it's very contagious, it's very serious, and it's very important that kids get vaccinated.
All right, thank you so much. That again is Dr. Melissa Lem joining us today. Days after a devastating earthquake, Myanmar struggles to recover. The latest on the humanitarian crisis coming up. In Myanmar, the number of deaths from last week's earthquake has now surpassed 2,000, and a critical rescue window has now closed after a frantic weekend of searching for survivors. As CBC's Salima Shivji reports, many are desperately clinging to hope for their loved ones to be found alive.
Days after the devastating earthquake, patients languish and wait for treatment outside this hospital, close to the epicenter, clinging to life after the powerful earthquake crushed so much in their country. Hospitals are overwhelmed, with many severely damaged, the World Health Organization says. The devastation in central Myanmar is beyond comprehension, the smell of dead bodies permeating the air. At this mosque, prayers for Eid, the end of the holy month of Ramadan, are also outside after the structure was heavily damaged. I'm so sad. My son was very excited for Eid, but now he's gone, this mother cries. Fatally injured when the mosque's walls collapsed on him. Myanmar has announced a national week of mourning, but it will be weeks before the damage is fully known in a country that's already grappling with a humanitarian crisis in the midst of a civil war.
But they faced a devastating violent conflict, previous natural disasters. So this is just another major emergency that children have had to endure over and over again. It's a brutal assault on children, and we need to step up now.
In Bangkok, more than 1,000 kilometers from the epicenter, cranes and excavators continue their work to find more than 70 people still trapped under this debris. Families of the missing wait anxiously in tent shelters, still hoping for a miracle, even as bodies are carried out.
The operation is ongoing here, even if the crucial rescue window of 72 hours after an earthquake that gives you a higher chance of finding survivors is now closed. Rescue workers are straining to hear any signs of life, however weak. This is your brother?
Hope isn't changing May Zin's resolve, a Burmese national working in Thailand who's here every day, desperate for any information about her younger brother, who is working on the 24th floor of the collapsed building. Every time a body is found, she says, we rush to check if it's my baby brother. We need to know. Even if it's terrible news of loss in the worst earthquake this region has seen in a century. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Bangkok.
Some 300,000 customers are still without power in Ontario tonight after a weekend ice storm slammed parts of central and eastern Ontario. Thick layers of ice brought down trees and power lines across wide areas of the province. Several municipalities declared states of emergency to deal with the massive cleanup. And our Jamie Strachan is in the hard-hit city of Barrie, north of Toronto tonight, where the cleanup is just getting started.
All around Barrie, Ontario, the sound of chainsaws fill the air.
Saturday night, we were going to bed around 11:30. As we got up, we kind of heard a little cracking sound, at which point we watched this part here collapse on my car.
Fallen branches everywhere, limbs and entire trees brought down by thick ice, smashed car windows, hydro lines ripped from roofs.
It was kind of sounding like gunshots going off a bunch of times. You kept hearing more and more, and we saw some transformers blow at 2 to 3 in the morning.
More than 800,000 customers at some point lost power. Hundreds of thousands are still in the dark, and it could take days to restore. In Barrie, traffic lights out, long lines for gas to fuel thirsty generators.
Yeah, we got lucky on where it landed, that's for sure.
In Jason Palmer's backyard, a massive tree narrowly missing his garage, landing inches from his house.
There was a freezing rain warning, and we knew that it was a possibility, but we didn't realize it was going to be to this level.
Freezing rain happens this time of year, but this storm was slow moving.
What is unusual is the duration of the freezing rain that we saw with this storm. Now, normally freezing rain is very transitory.
That lingering freezing rain coating a massive swath of eastern Ontario. Some areas saw as much as 3 centimeters of ice. In nearby Orillia, the storm has paralyzed the city.
Could be certainly in the week before everyone has power. And then there's the rebuild after that.
Further east in Peterborough, the damage is extensive.
We were in the house while the tree came down. I was upstairs, my wife was downstairs. You heard it. It shook the house when it hit the house and slid off the roof. I knew it was sitting on the car before I even walked outside. So
And Darius Madavi joins us now with another look at the weather. But Darius, we just saw footage of that storm. Is there anything more that you can tell us about this?
Yeah, I want to talk about how the storm is now moving into Atlantic Canada a little bit more. You'll notice that for the most part, Ontario and Quebec have seen the worst that they're going to see from this system rolling through, but still significant effects over here. The purple here is freezing rain, and like we heard, just lingering for a very long time, allowing a lot of buildup of that ice and a lot of extra danger. That's why we have so many warnings in place in Atlantic Canada right now that will likely stay in place for a while yet. And you can see that model data expecting over the next 24 hours to see that go through. And model data, we don't see the freezing rain, but know that especially for parts of Newfoundland, we are going to see significant freezing rain as that rolls through as well. And I do also want to quickly mention the fact that Ontario is not entirely out of the woods yet. If instead we look at instead of the next 24 hours, we're looking at the next, the day after that, Wednesday and Thursday, you can see another storm system rolling through, likely to pack some freezing rain as well. Now, let's turn our attention over here in BC, where we don't have anything nearly as exciting. A few showers and flurries linger across the province over the next couple days, but for the most part, we are looking at very calm conditions across the board. Again, in the southern interior especially, some showers and flurries here on the lower mainland as well, mostly coming in those overnight hours. So on the south coast, expect to see some showers overnight tonight and then again tomorrow night. But then other than that, really nothing but sunshine and temperatures slowly climbing as we head into the weekend, actually staying pretty seasonal for the first few days and then jumping significantly into the weekend. So if we take a look at this map of the temperatures, you'll notice them staying pretty close to seasonal, which here for the lower main, for Vancouver by the water and for much of the south coast is around 12 degrees or so. You'll notice those temperatures staying fairly consistent. And then if we were to roll this forward to Friday and Saturday, that's when we'd see that big jump in temperatures for the interior as well. Most places jumping about 8 to 10 degrees or so as we head into the weekend. So pretty significant change as we get into that time. And inland areas of Vancouver will feel significantly warmer as well. But again, in the meantime, a few showers, a few flurries lingering, especially for parts of the interior. And a 5-day forecast is pretty easy. Again, some showers tonight, some showers tomorrow night, but mostly looking at a lot of sunshine.
Feels like spring is here. Shall we take a deep breath?
Yes.
All right, let's look at some hopeful news this Monday. Darius has some data here on how we can create energy to share with us and some big changes that are happening globally. What do you got for us?
Yes, so I want to talk a bit about the share of how electricity is produced around the world. And if we look at global data, this is from Our World in Data, one of my favorite websites, which is one of the nerdiest things I've ever said. You can see fossil fuels peaking about a decade ago and then starting to fall. Meanwhile, renewables have been growing pretty significantly, a 10% growth in the last 20 years in terms of their share, but it's really come at the expense of nuclear power. It's not necessarily that we're using less nuclear power, it's just that the share is decreasing because we're using more energy and we're not really building more nuclear to compensate. Now, if we look at Canada in particular, notice that our renewables for electricity generation, mostly driven by hydropower, stay very steady and pretty high. Meanwhile, our fossil fuels are staying steady and our nuclear. So not as dramatic a picture here in Canada, although if we looked at all energy, including cars and heating, not just electricity, fossil fuels are a lot higher. So that's why we say maybe it'll be okay.
Maybe it will be okay. Thanks, Darius.
Thank you.
What's good for the goose? How about not having an arrow stuck in its bum? We meet Wilson the goose, who's been set free after a slow recovery. That's next. An injured Canada goose that's garnered national attention is once again flying free after months of rehabilitation.
Saurabh Sandhu has the heartwarming story of Wilson the goose, who was released back into the wild.
You're fine, you're fine, you're fine.
One final check of Wilson the goose before he is set free.
The feathers have come back. There's a little bit of scar tissue, but as far as I can see, there's no damage.
Wilson has had a tough journey after he was struck by an arrow. Wildlife photographer Tim Shear helped rescue the injured bird.
I'm glad to see him finally get a second chance at life, because he's gone through a lot of pain in the last 10 months.
Once we had that removed, there was a large hole that had been left behind. And that was the big fear, was that this hole would continue to putrefy and become an abscess, and that the recovery would be delayed.
Wilson's resilience has led to a full recovery. Since the surgery, he has been healing from his injuries at a wildlife rescue center, where staff say,
right off the bat, he was very feisty, a lot of energy, didn't like any of us very much, just like any other goose, but he had, I would say, more energy than the average, considering what he'd been through.
Now, after 2 months of care, it's time for Wilson to return to his habitat. Volunteers gathering at Brennan Park in Squamish Sunday to say farewell to their new friend. As Sir opens the door of the cage, the excitement builds. Slowly, he tippy-toes out, a little hesitant to embrace his newfound freedom.
You're free, Wilson, go!
He heads straight to a flock of geese lurking nearby.
He just sitting there going, dude, I have a story for you. You don't want to know what happened to me for the last few months. Next time we go for beers, I'll tell you the whole story.
A heartwarming ending for a community invested in Wilson's well-being.
I only get to see the worst parts, so being able to experience the good parts has been a huge, huge plus for me.
Walton says he is grateful for those who came together to help an animal in need. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Squamish.
I'm not usually one to feel really bad for Canada geese, but
yeah,
that was rough for Wilson.
Yeah, well, he's flying free and he's got some lore.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6.
And I will have your full next local news at 11 o'clock right after the National. Good night.